So thank you all for joining us for the grad school prep series entrance exams, the GMAT workshop. Joining us today is Clay Cooper, attorney and president and founder of Cooper Test Prep. He's going to provide us with an introduction to the test, its format, content, and media, the need to prepare for it, resources for further study, and general test prep advice. I'm going to hand it over to Clay to get us started.
Thank you, Valerie. Can everybody hear me all right, first of all? Anybody want to just say in the chat window there? Yes, no. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Thank you. Awesome. So my name is Clay Cooper. I am, as Valerie mentioned, president and founder of Cooper Test Prep. And I just wanted to speak with you all today about the GMAT. And speaking with Nevina and some others, it sounds like several of you all are considering graduate programs that might require you to take the GMAT. So I would love to talk about it. It's one of my favorite tests, actually. So that's the idea behind this presentation. Hopefully you'll find it useful. My goal is to, as Valerie mentioned, kind of familiarize you with the test, make sure you understand what you're facing in the GMAT, and then give you hopefully some really good advice that'll help you not only be better at the test, but prepare more effectively for it. So that's kind of the goal for today. Can everybody see these slides that I have popped up on the screen? Yeah, okay. Are they occupying the whole screen, or is it just like a small portion?
It takes up like almost the whole screen. There's a little white space on the left.
Cool, but large enough to see?
Yes,
anyway?
For sure.
Cool, awesome, great. Awesome. So I will make these slides available to you all after the presentation as well. I'm happy to send them to whoever would like me to send them to you. That was a grammatically convoluted sentence, but if you want the slides, let me know. I'm going to give you a link in just a minute, and you can just leave me your name and email at that link, and I'll be happy to send you the slides. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda for today. I'm going to start by introducing you to myself, and then we'll talk about the test. We'll start with just the basics, the big picture stuff you need to know about the GMAT. We'll then talk a little bit about computer adaptive testing, or CAT, which is the kind of methodology that GMAT is the company that makes the GMAT. Computer adaptive testing is what GMAT uses to administer the GMAT. Basically, it is the way in which the test changes live as you take it, right? So as if it weren't hard enough, the GMAT changes as you take it, depending on whether you're getting questions right or wrong. So we're going to talk about that, how it works, how much you should panic about it, etc. And I'll make sure you're familiar with all that. Then we're going to jump into the quantitative section, more simply described probably as the math section of the GMAT. I'll make sure you know what you're going to face in that section, what the question types are, what the concepts that are tested are, how to pace yourself in the section, all that good stuff. So make sure you're familiar with the quantitative section. We'll then do the same thing for the verbal section. Those of you who have already familiarized yourselves with the GMAT will probably know that there are actually 4 different section types on the test. There's the analytical writing assessment, integrated reasoning, quantitative, and verbal. The analytical writing assessment and integrated reasoning are the 2 sections that are, I won't call them superfluous, but they're considered generally less important by a graduate school admissions committee, say. And while I would love to talk to you about them, I have lots of good nerd stuff to yell at you about on those two points. We're going to limit today to just the quantitative and verbal. In other words, quantitative and verbal scores are the ones that make up your score out of 800. They're more important by most measures. So I'm going to stay focused on those today. If you do have questions about the analytical writing assessment or integrated reasoning, hit me up. I'm going to give you my contact info in just a minute, and we can nerd out about them over text or email or on the phone or something. So after we talk about the quantitative and verbal sections, we're going to just talk about like big picture test prep advice. And then I will take your questions at the end if you have any. And then we'll do just a few odds and ends to wrap up the presentation. So first, let me introduce you to myself. Why on earth you should care at all about what I have to say about the GMAT. So as Valerie mentioned, my name is Clay Cooper. I'm a practicing trial attorney here in Las Vegas. I graduated from UNLV's Boyd School of Law. magna cum laude, and I've been practicing for a little bit. But before I became an attorney, I had a pretty, thank you, had a pretty long, I say long, had a pretty long for me career because I'm not that old, 10 years or so, a little more than that, in test prep. So I was a test prep nerd long before I became an attorney. And I remain a test prep nerd after becoming an attorney. I started Cooper Test Prep basically to provide classes and tutoring on a variety of tests. I teach, among other things, the GMAT. The GMAT is one of the most popular tests that I teach. I am qualified with a 780 out of 800 to teach it. If you're familiar at all with how the scoring scale on the GMAT works, you know that that's like a very high 99th percentile score. I've also got 99.8 percentile scores on the LSAT, 2 of those. I won some awards when I was at Boyd. I've had thousands of students. They've had dramatic score increases. Had students admitted to every one of the Ivy League schools, every one of the top 14 law schools, Harvard, Stanford, Yale. I have a number of students currently, or excuse me, not currently, a number of students that I have taught who study at the Lee Business School here at UNLV. A number of students of mine are current and former Boyd Law students here at UNLV. My students won millions of dollars in scholarships. I tell you what, final shameless flex before we move on to something else. I've got, let's see, 99.8 percentile scores on the LSAT, GRE, GMAT, IC, some other tests, 2 perfect scores on the SAT, 1 perfect score on the ACT, 1 perfect score in the PSAT, that is, excuse me. And I teach all of those tests plus the bar exam. So I will stop talking about this. This is my least favorite part of the presentation. I am, as we speak, shamelessly flexing on the internet about my test scores. I promise I don't go around in real life talking about this stuff. Please bear with me. The idea is to build some credibility as I spend the next hour or so yelling at you about the GMAT. So hopefully you now understand that I do know whereof I speak when it comes to these tests, and you can trust my advice there. I offer courses and tutoring in each of these tests, including the GMAT. In fact, I've got a GMAT course coming up, starts this Saturday at UNLV, okay? So an in-person, live, masked up, I'm sure, course on campus at UNLV. It's gonna be 18 hours, 6 3-hour lessons over 3 weeks. We're gonna go on Saturdays and Sundays from noon to 3 p.m. You can find out more information about that course at my website, cooperprep.com/GMAT. So if you're at all interested in that, I'm probably going to close registration in the next day or 2. So please, if you're curious about the course, check it out, cooperprep.com/GMAT. It's $700 for 18 course hours. As part of that, you get textbooks that I wrote about the GMAT. You'll get practice problem sets. You'll get all the lessons and then actual class sessions, and then we'll do practice test review. I definitely think you'll get your money's worth. I take pride in over-delivering on what I sell. So let me know if you're interested. Yeah, Marlene is going to be there. I can't wait. It's going to be awesome. Here is my cell phone number right here and my personal email. If you're interested in the course, or if you're not interested in the course, but you just have a question about getting into grad school, please hit me up. Text me, call me, email me, whatever. I want to be of help to you however I can. Okay. So there will be no hard sell. I'm not going to get you on the phone and try and talk you into buying tutoring or anything. Just let me know if you got a question. I want to be helpful to you all. Okay. Please feel free to use my number or my email. All right. Let's quit with the self-promotional stuff and talk about the test. So about the GMAT. About the GMAT. First things we need to know about the GMAT are like the big picture stuff, right? How does it work? How's it administered? What am I facing? All that. So the GMAT used to be entirely administered via secure testing centers, like a Pearson VUE testing center. There's one not far from campus, actually. So you would go in and it's crazy like how locked down it is. You have to like give them you have to sign a form and they like pat you down and draw your blood and give you a polygraph and stuff before they'll let you in to take the test. That's what it feels like. It's not quite that extreme, but it's easier to get on an airplane than it is to get into these secure testing centers to take the GMAT. That used to be the only way you could take it. Since the pandemic, one of the silver linings of the new world we live in is that you can take the GMAT online and remote, right? So you can take it in the comfort of your own home. Now I say that that's I talk about that as if it's a convenience, and it is, but one of my best students took the LSAT today by remote testing, and she had a proctoring nightmare. So just keep that in mind. There are unique challenges that you will face if you take it remotely as well. You have to secure your own testing center environment. In other words, you got to make sure nobody's going to come in and talk to you while you're taking the test. You got to make sure you can get the proctoring software to work and all that noise. So remote testing is an option. It comes with its own challenges. So make sure that you do not just show up on your remote test day thinking it's all going to be gravy, even if you haven't looked at it yet. You got to get all your ducks in a row, make sure your computer's set up correctly, make sure your home environment is going to be like it needs to be, quiet and peaceful while you take the test. But if you can do all those things, remote testing is, I think, preferable for most students. The secure testing center administration remains an option, but it can be very uncomfortable. It's like doing the most important thing you've ever done, but at the DMV cubicle, and yeah, it's bizarre. So if you can take it at home, I recommend it. Just be ready for the unique hurdles you'll face there. So as I mentioned earlier, the GMAT consists of 4 sections. We have the analytical writing assessment, integrated reasoning, quantitative, and verbal. Analytical writing assessment and integrated reasoning represent the, we'll call them less objective portions of the test. They are sections of the test that are most recent in development, and they are the weirdest in terms of what you're used to if you've taken standardized tests before. Analytical writing assessment is you basically read and analyze someone else's argument and write about it. Integrated reasoning, you're given information in a variety of different formats, and you have to synthesize it to answer multiple choice questions. Again, both of these are very interesting, and I would love to talk to you about them. If you have questions about them, please reach out. I'd love to have a nerdy conversation with you about it. But we're going to stay focused on quantitative and verbal today because this is the bread and butter of these. Your score out of 800 is determined solely by your quantitative and verbal score. Many graduate school programs look only at these two. For instance, the MBA program at UNLV looks only at quantitative and verbal, so we're going to stay focused on that today. All right, it's important to note that on the GMAT as a whole, you cannot skip, return to, or change your answers to questions. You cannot skip, return to, or change your answers to questions. That is unusual, let's say, among standardized tests, at least the ones that most of us are used to. And most tests that we're used to, you can move around, skip around, come back to a question, etc. You can't do that on the GMAT. And not only that, there is, as we will talk about, as we will discuss, there is a huge penalty if you leave any questions blank, right? So if I can't skip around or go back to a question, and there's a huge penalty for leaving questions blank, those two rules in combination mean that pacing yourself is extremely important on the GMAT, more so than on any other test I'm familiar with. If you get behind pace on the GMAT, you are in a world of hurt, all right? So we're going to talk a little bit later about how to prevent that and how to check and see if you're on pace. And then another kind of idiosyncrasy of the GMAT is that you get to choose your own section order within limits, right? So the options available to you include the analytical writing assessment, integrated reasoning, quantitative verbal, verbal quantitative, integrated analytical, or quantitative verbal integrated analytical. If I may be so bold as to make a suggestion without actually knowing you personally, I would suggest you go with one of these latter two. Generally, just number one, verbal and quantitative tend to be the more difficult sections for most people. And number two, they tend to be more important depending on which program you're applying to. So obviously do your homework in whatever program you're trying to get into, find out what they care about. But if verbal and quantitative, if your composite score out of 800 is the most important to the school you're applying to, then use one of these latter two options. That way you get to do the two hardest, most important sections first before you're burned out. Mental drain is a very real thing. And this isn't my unsubstantiated internet opinion. It's like well supported by actual scientists who know what they're talking about. Essentially, your performance will fall off over the course of the test, in any test, right? And that's not unique to you, doesn't make you stupid. It happens to all of us. I'm sure you have your own subjective experiences with that. I know when I reach the end of a busy workday, I often feel like I'm brain dead, right? That happens even within the course of a test like the GMAT. So with that in mind, if quantitative and verbal are more important for you as they will be for most people. You'd probably want to stick with one of these options. Cool. All right. So here's a breakdown of the detailed format. The analytical writing assessment is 30 minutes long, consists of one question. You'll be presented with an argument and asked to analyze it. Now, again, as a lawyer, I love talking about that, right? But if you want to talk about that, reach out to me. We'll have a conversation about it. Integrated reasoning is really weird. Integrated reasoning that will give you several pages worth of information presented in different forms, like tables, graphics, text, etc. And then they'll ask you multiple choice questions that require you to read through all of that information and synthesize it, right? It's like a research project for school almost, except that you're being asked multiple choice questions about it. So as you can imagine, it's very interesting, definitely worth preparing for, but not within the scope of what we're going to look at today. It's 30 minutes long. There are 12 questions per head. You'll notice that the score range for each of these first two sections we've discussed is between 0 and 6 and 1 and 8, respectively. For analytical writing assessment, integrated reasoning, these do not count toward your score out of 800. Okay, so if you are thinking in terms of your score of 800, that's good. I encourage you to do that, but these two sections don't factor into it. It comes entirely from quantitative. Your quantitative and verbal sections, they each allow you roughly 2 minutes per question. You have 62 minutes to answer 31 questions in quantitative reasoning and 65 minutes to answer 36 questions in verbal. Okay. We'll talk about the question types in each section in just a minute, but your score will be on a scale from 6 to 51. And if you're wondering how this number factors into your score out of 800, in other words, if I score between a 6 and 51 in quantitative and between a 6 and 51 in verbal, how do they arrive at a number out of 800 overall? The answer is using a very sophisticated process of essentially curving your score. We can talk more about that a little bit later too, but for now, just know that's the big picture format of the test. All right, so let's talk a little bit about quantitative to begin with. We're going to, again, we've already addressed this format. We'll talk about computer adaptive testing, how to stay on pace. We will complain as a group about the fact that you're not allowed to have a calculator. We'll look a little bit more in detail at how the scoring works, and then we'll address the question types, content covered and not covered, and we'll do some practice questions if we have time. All right, so it's actually not, 75 minutes and 37 questions. It's 62 minutes, 31 questions. Those are outdated numbers. That was the old format. It used to be 75 minutes, 37 questions. But as you can see, you've got about 2 minutes per question, right? It is multiple choice. There is a penalty for unanswered questions. And just to clarify, I don't mean there's a penalty in that you don't get credit for unanswered questions. I mean that your score will be docked points for not answering a question, if that makes sense, okay? So it's not like the SAT where if you're one of my SAT students and you leave a question blank on the SAT, you don't get credit for that question, which is a strategic error. You should answer the question, but you don't get penalized for not answering it, right? On the GMAT, you absolutely do. So you cannot afford not to answer a question. No matter what happens when you take the GMAT, answer every question. If that means you have to abandon the last minute of your time to just blindly guess on the rest of the questions, then abandon the last minute of your time to blindly guess on the rest of the question. That is infinitely preferable to leaving it blank, okay? If you leave a question blank on the GMAT, I will show up at your house and yell at you, okay? So don't do that. That's just, I don't have time to be driving around Las Vegas yelling at people. So make sure you answer everybody, all the questions on the quantitative and verbal sections. We'll talk about how computer adaptive testing works in just a minute. For now, just know that the two sections that use it are quantitative and verbal, the two that we're going to be talking about today. You are not allowed to use a calculator on the quantitative portion of the GMAT, which is a little bit alarming for a lot of us, right? Usually when I share this information with people, they are less than thrilled to hear it, that you're not allowed to use a calculator. Fortunately, you don't really have to worry about that for a couple of reasons. Number one, the arithmetic you'll be asked to do, arithmetic here meaning the numerical operations, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, finding roots, finding powers, that sort of thing. The arithmetic you'll be asked to do is not the main focus of the test. They're not out here trying to see if you can do 7-digit long division. That's not the point of the GMAT. You will be required to do some arithmetic, but in many cases, you'll be able to simplify that And in almost all of the cases, the arithmetic you'll be asked to do will fall within arithmetic you're very capable of and that you learned in third. You just need to brush up on it for the most part. So that's one of the things that we'll focus on in my upcoming class, is making sure everybody's got the basic arithmetic skills they need to not miss points because of that on the GMAT, but it's nothing to worry about. I will also say this too, as a general observation with any standardized test, if there is an aspect of the test that is difficult, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make your life harder, because all of these tests are scored on a curve. So the GMAT is scored on a curve. Very simply, that's actually a gross oversimplification of how it actually works. It's far more sophisticated than that, but the short version is it's scored on a curve, which means, yeah, you're not allowed to use a calculator, but that only hurts you if you are worse without a calculator than the other test takers. Does that make sense? No one's allowed to use a calculator. Everybody has to jump over that same hurdle, then it only hurts you if it's harder for you than it is people. So that's just another good thing to keep in mind, and that's a good general principle to remember. If you click to the next question on the GMAT and you see the world's hardest math problem, and you think to yourself, well, definitely not going to business school because I have no idea what's going on in this, right? Don't worry about that. That difficult question that you're facing, other students have to face very similar difficult questions. Many of them will have to face that exact same question. So don't panic about it. You also are given a non-erasable scratch booklet. Non-erasable so that the secret police of the testing center can check your work to make sure you're not cheating or communicating in code with aliens or dark spirits or something. I don't know. But you're not allowed to erase what you write in the scratch booklet so that they can take a look at it. It is really helpful in the scratch booklet. You will need it sometimes, especially to work out arithmetic. So let's talk about this computer adaptive testing. What is it? Essentially, the short version of the computer adaptive testing is this. The GMAT will get harder as you get more questions right, and it will get easier as you get more questions right. It adapts its difficulty until you are answering about half of the questions correct. So does that make sense? Have I communicated that clearly? Because computer adaptive testing is baffling. Hopefully. Okay. So in other words, when you begin the GMAT, you'll be facing, when you begin the quantitative section of the GMAT, let's say, you'll be facing questions of about moderate difficulty, middle of the road, right? And every time you answer a question correctly, the algorithm essentially will judge me to be a little bit higher scoring than it did before, right? And it will adjust the difficulty up a little bit. The upshot of that is that my score in these computer adaptive sections is not determined solely or even primarily by how many questions I get right. Instead, it's determined by at what level of difficulty I top out. Does that make sense? So the questions get harder and harder as I go, get more right. If I'm getting them wrong, they'll get easier and easier. In either case, it will tend to level out when I'm getting about half of them correct. So that's going to be one of the biggest determinants of your score. Essentially, I don't want to drill this topic into the ground too much because I inevitably get lots of questions about computer adaptive testing. Here are the main things you need to know. Don't try to outsmart this test. Don't try to outsmart the test. Just try to answer each question correctly. Sometimes students ask me, they'll ask me some form of this question. Should I miss a question at a certain point or in the beginning or at the end or something so that the computer adjusts the algorithm to make my test easy? The answer is, while I understand why you might wonder that, the answer is hard no. Never ever try to improve your GMAT score by purposefully missing questions. I promise it's not going to work. Don't try to outsmart the test that way. On any given question, you should just be doing your best trying to get it right. Okay. It's also nothing to worry about. Computer adaptive testing guarantees that you're going to miss some questions, quite a few actually, questions. But it also means that stupid mistakes don't hurt you as much. The penalty that you face for missing a single question is not as dramatic because you are expected to miss questions. You are going to miss questions. It is going to happen. In fact, the people that computer adaptive testing tends to affect most, in my experience, are students who are used to getting perfect scores on things or getting near perfect scores on things. Because if that's you, you got to let go of that idea of the GMAT. It's not going to happen. All right. Well, you might get a perfect score, but you're not going to get all the questions right, if that makes sense. The test is going to get harder and harder until you're missing some questions consistently. And as long as you can accept that and you don't get bogged down on a question, get behind pace because of it, you'll be fine. It's nothing to stress about. The GMAT, the people who make the GMAT would tell you if you asked that computer adaptive testing measures your ability more accurately than old school testing does. Whether that's true or not is debatable. I tend to believe that it is true. Many people do not believe that it is true. It doesn't really matter for us, right? Unfortunately, no one has yet called me to ask for my opinion on the subject. GMAT hasn't hit me up to be like, yo, should we keep doing this? So we're just got to deal with it for now, I guess, until they do call to find out. It's not a big deal. You're gonna face some difficult questions. You can handle it. You need to accept that you're gonna miss some of those questions. But other than that, it shouldn't change your approach too much. All right, so with 62 minutes to complete 31 questions, you have 2 minutes per question. Sticking to your pace is really important. And this is kind of where the difficulty that you're going to face matters, right? So if I'm going to miss some of those questions, I need to accept that, because if I get behind pace, then I'm in deep trouble, if that makes sense, right? I can't afford to get behind pace. So what you ought to do is, in other words, what you ought to do to make sure that you're staying on pace as the test is going, do not use this table. It is outdated, but what you want to do is calculate your pacing benchmarks before the test begins. That makes sense. So if I have 62 minutes to answer 31 questions, right, then my maximum should be 62 minutes. Maybe my halfway point would be 31. I can pick a quartile before that. We'll call it 15. And one after that, we'll call it 46, right? And at each of those minute benchmarks, I should have a certain number of answers completed, right? A certain number of questions completed. And actually, we should make them even. In other words, I should have 8 questions completed after 16 minutes. I should have 16 questions completed after 32 minutes. I should have roughly 23 questions completed after 36 minutes, and roughly 31 after 62. Actually, exactly 32. The reason I say to time yourself with pacing benchmarks rather than question by question is that if I'm checking after every question, or even after every third question, to see if I'm on pace, then I'm spending a lot of time and brain power doing pace math, when all that time and brain power should be focused on doing math. Does that make sense? When the proctor says go on test day, the first thing I do is write down in my scratch booklet my pacing benchmarks. Literally, they say go, I write out my whole table of pacing benchmarks, and then that's on the first page of my booklet, and I never have to do the math anymore. If I just finished number 14, all I got to do is look back to the front of my booklet and see if I'm on pace. No math anymore. So I recommend that you do that. You can't afford to be spending time or brain power on test day trying to figure out if you're on pace. You ought to have that all memorized well beforehand. Again, I've already yelled at you about this, but if you leave a question blank on the quantitative or verbal sections, or on any section really, I will cry myself to sleep that night. No matter what happens, don't leave a question blank. You have to blindly guess, That's what it takes. So there are 3 scores that you get from the verbal, and quantitative sections. The first is the one we already talked about. I think it actually starts at 6, between a 6 and a 51. That is your performance on this section on an absolute constant scale. The most important score that you'll get, or not most important, let's say the most inherently meaningful score that you will get, is this percentile score. Okay. Your percentile score indicates the percentage of other test takers that you need. Now, because all of these standardized tests that we take are essentially used to compare us to our peers, right? When I apply to a graduate program, the admissions committee is essentially comparing me to the other applicants to see who is most deserving of their limited number of spots, if that makes sense, right? So because that's the case, the most inherently meaningful number that I will get is my percentile score. What percentage of other test takers did I beat, right? So this is the number I live and die by. I think if you're measuring your own performance, you should pay special attention to this number as well. The one we tend to speak of is this composite overall GMAT score between 200 and 800. But as you probably have guessed, why does it start at 200? There is no reason. It's made up and arbitrary. Why does it end at 800? There is no reason. It's made up and arbitrary, right? The only score that has any inherent meaning is this percentile score. So I would say pay special attention to that. You'll notice too that the percentile score and the scaled score vary on a bell curve with each other. If you've taken a stats class, you'll recognize this. But the GMAT, students' performance on the GMAT essentially follows a normal distribution, as does the performance of any large group of humans on any highly skilled activity, which is to say that very few people will do very poorly, very few people will do very well. The vast majority of people will do somewhere in there. Which means that if we start from the 0.1 percentile and we go to the 99.9th percentile, the scaled score does not vary evenly. It doesn't just go, you don't have the same delta in scaled score for each increment in percentile score at different points in the scale, which is a really nerdy way of trying to say what I'm trying to say. Let me try it again. The difference between I think it's a 700 or 750 and an 800 is 1 percentile point. Does that make sense? So that is a sixth of the entire scaled scores scale, and it only covers the 99th percentile. That makes sense? So in other words, on a scale between 200 and 800, I got a 780 on my GMAT, and that might seem like I'm 20, what is that? About 1/30th of the scale I missed out on, when in reality, that's a 99.8th percentile, which is to say second place out of 1,000 people. So as you can see, look at me flexing again, take that down. My point is the scaled score and percentile score do not vary directly. It's on a bell curve, okay? So pay attention to your percentile score. All right, let's talk about the question types in the quantitative section. There are 2 of them. With any of these idiosyncratic graduate school tests, the GMAT among them, one of the most important things you need to do in preparing is get familiar with the question types. Okay, so if any of you have looked at, for instance, the GRE or the LSAT or the MCAT or anything in addition to the GMAT, you know that although there is some overlap between the skills and concepts tested on these tests, the question types are all highly different. They're very idiosyncratic. They're strange, to put it simply, right? And if you want to do well on this test, you have got to master the question types. Any thorough and effective GMAT prep will spend a lot of time just getting really good at the question types, if that makes sense. Because the material tested is hard enough, you need to have the question type down before you show up to take the test so that you can just focus on the material. So in the quantitative section, the 2 question types are problem solving and data sufficiency. Problem solving is the most straightforward. This feels like an old school math problem, right? Like you'd see in a high school class, in a college class, and on the SAT, right? They'll ask you a very simple question. What's the value of G? How many cats will fit in the laundry basket, et cetera, right? Data sufficiency questions are another thing entirely. And a data sufficiency questions, they will give you a set of information, a question, and 2 additional statements. And your job is to determine whether each statement individually, neither statement individually, but both statements together, or neither statement individually and not even both of the statements combined will allow you to answer them, which is bizarre. So they're going to give you a set of information and ask you a question, and you never actually need to know the answer to that question. All you need to know is what additional information, if any, do you need to ascertain the answer to that question. If you're listening to me right now and you're thinking, what is this fool talking about? Don't even worry about it. I'm going to show you some examples in a little bit that'll help you make sense of it. But again, you got to be ready for this. This is going to be a big part of your quantitative score. And there's no excuse for showing up on test day and not being familiar with the way the questions are asked. So, final topic before we look at some examples, the content covered. This is really important to talk about, especially for college students, which I understand most of us are. It's kind of alarming to think about what might show up on the GMAT, so we need to be clear on what is and is not on there. Algebra's on there, arithmetic's on there, geometry's on there, a number of properties are on there. Number properties can be anything from like even and odds to, at the top end of the scale, they'll ask you really weird questions about like remainders and factorials and stuff, right? Don't let that intimidate you though. Number properties are a discrete body of information that you can master if you need scoring at that. Notice, most importantly, what is not covered: calculus, trigonometry, higher level algebra, and matrices. These are all worth noting. So if the thought of doing calculus makes you nauseous, don't worry, it's not going to be on the GMAT. Also me too. So all good. Trigonometry is the same way. Higher level algebra is not going to be on there. And matrices aren't. All right. Let's see, we already talked about all that. I think that like double pasted those slides or something. Let's look at some example problems. You guys ready for this? Are we awake? Can you guys access the chat? I'm going to need your help getting through these questions for sure. Just throw something in the chat. Leave me alone, nerd. Okay, cool. There we go. All right. So Joshua and Mia are taking turns driving a car. Joshua drives 75% of the distance between two cities. What is the ratio of the number of miles Mia drives to the number of miles Joshua drives? All right. So if they're taking turns, Joshua drives 75% of the distance. So it sounds like we'll call it D sub J. The distance Joshua drives is or equals 75%. What's 75% expressed as a decimal? 0.75, of course, right? So 0.75 of the total of typically translates to multiplication, right? So we might say the distance that Josh drives is 75% of the total. DJ equals 0.75t. The distance that Maria drives, Mia drives, she's the only other driver, must then be the other 25%, right? There we go. And they want to know what's the ratio of the number of miles Mia drives to the number of miles Joshua drives. That would be the ratio of distance Mia over distance Joshua, right? But we know what each of those values are. Distance Mia is 0.25t. Distance Joshua is 0.75t. The t's cancel. What I end up with is 0.25 over 0.75, which simplifies to. Make sense? This would be probably categorized as one of the simpler quantitative questions you might face, which is not to say that if you're looking at this, not remembering how to do it, that you're not going to get into grad school. It just may mean that you have to brush up on your math. I will say this too. I usually mention this earlier in the presentation, but I forgot. If you are an adult, a college student or post-grad, and I think most of you all are undergrads, if I'm not mistaken. If you're not using math in your profession, in your job, or in current classes that you have, it will go away. That has been my experience. I've been teaching these tests for a long time. People tend to get better at reading and writing as they get older, or at least people who use them in their job or study them in school tend to get better at reading and writing as they get older. People who do not use math every day tend to forget all the math they ever. The good news is it's easy to get it back, but I say all that to say, if you're not studying math or using it right now in a job, be prepared to do some work to brush up on it. It's probably going to work. All right. So here is another, well, you all tell me, what type of question is this? Again, we have problem solving and data sufficiency. Which type is this? Using the law school Socratic method here. Yeah, good. Problem solving. Exactly. Thank you, Andrew. Cool name. Yeah, so problem solving. They just give me some information and they ask me to answer a question. Simple enough, right? And they want to know what's the value of y. Okay. All right. So I happen to know that when two straight lines intersect, the angles that are opposite each other are equal. Those are called vertical angles, right? Or opposite angles, depending on who taught you geometry, right? But they're equal. That's the important thing. So in this case, I know then that x plus 40 must be equal to y minus 20. Simple enough. Cool. So I think if I can figure out what x is, then I should be able to figure out what y is, right? Okay. But I also happen to know that x plus 40, that angle is adjacent to the angle x. And I know that any two angles that are next to each other or adjacent when two straight lines intersect must add up to what? 180 degrees, right? So in other words, x plus 40 has to add up to 180 degrees. Simplifying that, that's 2x, and then subtract 40 from each side equals 140. Divide each side by 2, x must equal 70. So I've now found the value of x, 70. I can plug that directly in. I have an equation with only one unknown. I should be able to find out y equal, add 20 to each side, y equals 100. Cool. Makes sense. And we're just, again, brushing up on some basic geometry here. This would probably still be factored or considered one of the easier math questions you might face, but they will get more difficult. Let's look at a couple. And actually, Valerie, I forgot to ask, what time are we ending? I had it written down. And then
just before 5.
Okay, cool. Well,
I do have a question in the chat, if it's okay, time.
Yeah, sure.
How do questions on this exam differ from the GRE?
That is a great question. I wonder whoever asked that. Were you at my GRE presentation last week or the week before? Because that will help me answer your question more. Okay. Cool. All right. So Angel, what I'm about to tell you is not strictly true because it's a gross oversimplification, okay? So please don't sue me, all right? But the quantitative section on the GMAT is typically more difficult. The verbal section on the GRE is typically more difficult. That's the conventional wisdom, anyway, okay? The GRE has more weird and a larger number of question types. Stated more simply, the question types on the GRE are more strange and are a larger number of them. So if you have a hard time mastering question types, the GRE is going to be, tough work. Other than that, they're fairly similar. The GRE tests vocabulary a lot more intensively. So where I find that especially matters is students maybe for whom English is not your first language, or even if English is your first language, if there's another language spoken in the home, then over the course of your life, you will be exposed to spoken English far less than a similarly situated person for whom English is spoken in the home. I say all that to say, in my experience, students for whom English is not spoken in their home or wasn't when they were growing up sometimes have a harder time getting to the level they want to score at in a vocabulary heavy test, if that makes sense. So standard English conventions and a wide vocabulary can be harder to master if that's the case. So just be aware of that. If that's the case, the GRE is vocab heavy, so the GMAT might be better for you. If you love math and you hate words, I'd say go with the GMAT. If you hate math and you love words, maybe the GRE is more up your alley. I certainly still think you could do well on either. And the GRE has its own difficult math as well. Final thing I'll say about that is, Angel, find out from the school you want to go to what you need, okay? Don't take my word for what test you should be taking. The first people you should speak to are the program you're applying to, right? You want to make sure you're barking up the right tree before you look too hard into what the test is. But I hope that helps. Also, please feel free to reach out to me. You have my cell number and my email. I'll throw them in the chat as well. If you want to talk further about it, I would love to. Cool. There you go. All right. So a certain company has a female. Actually, you know what? We don't really have time to do too many more. So let me skip to like a monster. Actually, this one's fine. A certain company has a female to male ratio among its employees of 6:1. The average or arithmetic mean annual salary for female employees is $30,000. If the company pays a total of, and by the way, as a lawyer, I just have to say, who is this company's lawyer? How on earth do you let them hire 6:1 female men? They're going to get sued up and down. They just malpractice. If the company pays a total of $7.38 million in annual salaries to its female employees, how many male employees does the company have? Not enough. Not enough. Get those numbers even. Anyway, so we know the ratio of female to male employees is 6:1. So female employees to male employees is 6:1. Cool, got it. If we cross multiply there, we'll get 1F equals 6M. In other words, the number of females equals 6 times the number of females. How are we going to find out how many male employees the company has? What do you think? Any ideas? Read the filings in the gender discrimination suit that they're about to get hit with. No, so here's what we're going to do. We know their total salary paid to female employees is $7.38 million. We know the average annual salary for female employees is $30,000. Let's use the average formula, right? In other words, isn't the average female salary going to be equal to the total female salary divided by the number of females, right? Cool. All right. Well, that'll help. We know the average female salary is $30,000. We know the total female salary is $7.38 million. Now the only remaining unknown in that equation is the number of female employees, F, right? So I can solve for F and multiply each side of that equation by F and then divide each side by 30,000. What I get is 73800. Make sure you get the right number of zeros over 30,000. Now you may be looking at that thinking, how on earth am I supposed to solve this without a calculator? Here's how you do it. Keep it simple. The zeros cancel. Boom, boom, boom. And we've really got 738 divided by 3. Okay, I can even break that down, right? I can even break down 738 divided by 3. So 738 could be called 600 and 100 or actually let's call that 120, 18. Would you agree with me that those three numbers would add up to 738? Yeah, and they're much more simple to divide by 3. If I'm dividing 738 by 3, that's a lot, but 600 divided by 3 is 200. 120 divided by 3 is 40. 18 divided by 3 is 6. So it looks like my number of female employees is 246. Does that make sense? Right, so if my number of female employees is 246, and that is 6 times my number of male employees, then I just need to divide each side of that equation by 6, and it looks like male is going to be equal to 41. And again, I'm just breaking that down, right? I know 24 divided by 6 is 4, so 240 divided by 6 must be 40. And then there's one more 6 there, right? So you could also, I'll show you some advanced techniques if I have the opportunity. I will show you some advanced techniques for simplifying arithmetic so that you don't actually have to work it all out on paper. That's going to be a big part of the test. All right, so let's get on to the verbal, but before we do, big picture advice for how to tackle the quantitative section. You need to know what's coming. There's no excuse for showing up on test day and being surprised by what you face. It is published on the internet, and there are lots of nerds like myself who would love to talk to you about it, right? So there's no excuse for being surprised by what you see on the GMAT. There's also no excuse for being uncomfortable with the testing environment. Although it is an uncomfortable environment, you have the opportunity to expose yourself to it well beforehand. A thorough prep routine will involve a lot really, of realistic practice tests, right? So taking it on test day should not be a new experience. It should be a very familiar experience. You need to pinpoint what you know and what you don't. If you're blindly repeating questions and problems that you already know how to do, then you're not really going to be helping your score very much. Whereas if there's a whole area of things that you need to know that you're not even aware of, it's really going to hurt your score in testing. You need to have a roadmap. This is a really important one because, especially for morale, if you're doing yourself justice preparing for the GMAT, there will come a day when you hate your life and you're super discouraged and you think, why am I doing this? I'm obviously not cut out for grad school. I don't know why I ever thought I was, right? There will be inevitable low points, right? Having a roadmap will help you get through those because none of that stuff is true, right? But having a roadmap and being able to check off like, oh, you know what, I already covered this, this, and this. And I've actually learned those things and mastered them. And I've only got this, this, and this left, right? That helps me maintain perspective when the going gets rough. So that's really, really important. Yeah. Treat it like a job. I know I don't have to lecture you all on the importance of being professional in this pursuit. You wouldn't be here on this call or watching this recording if you weren't pretty serious about becoming a professional who does this sort of thing for. So you don't need my lecture on that, but that is a useful tool. If you can think of it as a job or as an audition for a job, which in a very real sense it is, that might help you stay motivated and focused. And finally, don't reinvent the wheel. Obviously, I'm very biased as a test prep expert, but there are lots of people out there who've already figured all of this out, and we would love to share it with you. So if you're trying to bootstrap your way into a good GMAT score, you may be making it harder on yourself than it has to. Let's talk about verbal. So the format in the verbal section is, let's see, 65 questions, 65 minutes, 36 questions, right? Still about 2 minutes per question. There are multiple choice as well. The pacing is less straightforward in the verbal section because the different question types take different amounts of time, okay? The pacing in the math section is more straightforward. It is less straightforward in the verbal section, right? There is the same penalty for unanswered questions. The computer adaptive testing works the same way. The questions will get harder as you do better, and they'll get easier as you do worse, all right? Get a non-erasable scratch booklet as well. We're going to talk a little bit about the question types. The scoring in the verbal section works the same way it does in the quantitative section. The only thing to know about those comparative scores is that they are unrelated to each other. Your score in the quantitative section is totally divorced from your score in the verbal section. They are two ships passing in the night. So make sure that you're aware of that. Let's talk about the question types. There are 3 sentence correction questions. They give you a sentence and ask you to fix it or not fix it if it doesn't need to be fixed. This will look like the English section of the ACT or the writing section of the SAT if you causing some PTSD flashbacks in here, I'm sure. But they'll just give you a sentence and it may or may not contain an error. If it doesn't contain an error, you'll choose A. If it does contain an error, you'll choose B, C, D, or E. And the in addition to employing the rules of grammar correctly, you also are responsible for clarifying the sentence's meaning. It goes beyond just grammar. You have to help them write more effectively. That's sentence correction. Reading prompt questions will give you a short text passage. There will be 4 reading prompt passages on the test. Each of those will be followed by 3 or 4 questions that test your understanding of the material presented in the passage. So this could be a challenge. If you think you've seen reading comp before, I'm sure you have, but you haven't seen it like this, okay? Unless you've taken another graduate level admissions test, this is going to be the hardest reading comp you've faced in a long time, would be my guess, or ever. So be prepared for that. And then critical reasoning questions are very similar to LSAT, logical reasoning questions. They'll give you a short stimulus that will contain an argument, and they'll ask you to perform some task with respect to that argument. For instance, strengthen it, weaken it, identify an assumption on which it rests, etc. If you have not seen a critical reasoning question, they are weird. Be prepared for that. If you're picking up on a theme today, it's that the GMAT asks you weird questions, and you got to be ready for that. They're fun, I think, but I'm just a nerd on the internet, so you have your own judgment. Sure. The comparative frequency, there will be 16 to 17 sentence correction questions at a minimum. There will be 13 to 14 reading comp questions following those 4 reading passages, and 11 to 12 critical reasoning questions. These numbers do vary a little bit due to what are called experimental questions. Experimental questions don't count. They just help they help GMAT set the curve for the test, okay? So you don't have to worry about those. You won't know which ones they are anyway, so just try to answer any questions. All right, so we already talked about the question types. Let's look at a couple examples. In English, speakers rely extensively on pronouns when referring to other individuals, but in many Asian languages, such as Japanese, pronouns are noticeably absent because individuals are referred to by their title or occupation rather than a generic term. So first of all, what kind of question is this? Any guesses of the 3 types we mentioned? Yeah, sentence correction for sure. Thanks, Christy. We're given a sentence and 5 different versions of the sentence. Note that A will always be the no change option, right? So A basically means no change. Does anyone see an error in this, the way it's currently written? Need to fix. Everybody all at once. No, I don't either. My suspicion is that it may be all right the way it is. But if I really want to confirm that, I need to find errors in the other answers. Right? I need to eliminate them conclusively. So do we see any errors in B? Unlike English, in which speakers rely extensively on pronouns when referring to other individuals, pronouns in many Asian languages, such as Japanese, blank, are noticeably absent. What do we think? See any errors there? This is an illiteralism. Yeah, so the blank, or excuse me, the portion of the sentence that is offered to us in B would be seamlessly entered in the place of the underlined portion here. So it doesn't need a period, but it still has an error. We have an illiteralism here, a comparison error. Unlike English, pronouns. You see that? The contrast that they're drawing is between, in one case, a language, and in another case, a category of words within a language. That is an illiteral comparison, right? That would be like me saying, unlike LeBron, who plays for the Lakers, the St. Louis Cardinals are a baseball team. Well, I'm making an illiteral comparison there. I'm comparing LeBron, a person, to a team, the St. Louis Cardinals, if that makes sense. So that is an illiteral comparison. And one of the things I teach in my classes is, if you notice an error in one of the answer choices, check the others for the same error. I think you'll find that that happens in all 4 of the incorrect answer choices here. C says, unlike English speakers, pronouns. English speakers and pronouns are not comparable quantities. Right? In one case, we have humans, and in the other, we have a category of nouns, right? So C has the same error that B does. What about D? Unlike those in English, so it seems like here they're referring to the pronouns, right? Unlike those pronouns in English. But at the end, the second item being compared is languages. So they corrected the first part, but then they changed the second part. So we're still comparing pronouns to languages, which is an illiteral comparison. You can't do that. What about E? In comparison with English pronouns. Yeah, so we still have a comparison between a language and a category of words, which means A is our answer. If you notice, we say in English. We're eliminating the comparison entirely, the way it's originally written. We're not saying like English, we're saying in English. Speakers rely on pronouns, okay? But in many Asian languages, pronouns are absent. So we eliminate the problematic comparison in A. That's why A is an answer. All right, I'm gonna skip to the end here, but let me just show you. This is what a reading comp passage would look like. And it would be followed by a few questions, for instance, primary purpose. This is what the critical reasoning or LSAT question looks like. Presented with an argument, and we're asked to, in this case, weaken the argument. Pick an answer that if true would weaken the argument. These are fascinating. If you're interested in these, go to the URL I'm going to give you in a minute, or actually I'll type it into the chat right now. And leave me your name and email, and I will send you these slides, okay? And you can look at them. That URL that I just typed in there will take you to a form where you can leave me your info so I can send you these slides. The big picture items to know for the verbal section are the same as they are for the quantitative section. There's no excuse for being surprised. You should know what's coming. There's no excuse for being uncomfortable. You should practice. Treat it like a job, have a roadmap, and don't reinvent the wheel. You do not have to reverse engineer the rules of comma usage. I would love to share them with you. So hit me up. Already did that. Cool. Any questions? I think my time is up, so I tell you what, I'll flash up the talk screen. And I can hang out. I still have time, Valerie. I don't know if they need to go or what, but if you're interested in my upcoming GMAT course that starts on Saturday, please check out this URL. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to get a text, call, or email. If you want a discount on tutoring, check out this URL. I can send you the slides from today and a coupon. So, thank you for your time. I appreciate everybody being here, and I'm happy to stay and answer questions. Thank you. See you Saturday. Yeah, for sure, Angel. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.